Hello and welcome to this special Government Information Service program. I am Press Secretary Philomena Robertson, thanking you for joining us. Now, the Grenada government and the public sector union, which it has been negotiating matters pertaining to pension restoration and reform, is currently at an impasse in their talks. Just recently, you would have heard a statement from Chairman of the government's Pension Engagements Committee, Mrs. Beryl Isaac, in which she provided clarity on the pension negotiations. Mrs. Isaac is here today to provide even more clarity on the matter, addressing pension reform and its elements in greater detail. Also with her is the Permanent Secretary of Finance, Mrs. Ophelia Wells-Cornwall, who will speak to the issue of affordability. Two key factors about any pension plan that we must keep in mind, whether in Grenada or elsewhere in the world, is that it must be affordable and sustainable over the long term. Ladies, welcome.
Thank you.
I will first start with the issue of gratuity, because there seems to be some sort of misconception about what gratuity is. Mrs. Isaac, can you explain for us?
Gratuity is a prepayment of your pension. It is an advance of your pension. Public officers have an option. You either opt to have a full pension or a reduced pension and gratuity. Of course, most of us would opt for a reduced pension and gratuity because in terms of your pension payment, it is a monthly sum that you get, and when you die, your estate would get it one more year, and none of us know how long we live. So we always opt for the gratuity, which is 25% of the sum that you would do as pension, and a reduced pension. So over 12.5 years, you get the reduced pension, which is the sum that government recovers over that period of time. And then after 12.5 years, you will revert to full pension. In the present scenario, under the 58 laws, the gratuity sum is 25% and the reduced pension is 75%. The unions are demanding that government pay them the 25% gratuity, 75% reduced pension. PS Ophelia Wells will speak to the issue of sustainability and affordability. But the worker is not disadvantaged in any way, because what the government is offering is 98% as a region and 2% gratuity. And over the 12.5 years, you will get the same amount of money. But the benefits that to be derived under what the government is offering is that you get a higher pension right away instead of the reduced sum. Added to that, pensioners get an increase in the allowance once government gives an increase, so it is indexed. So whereas you would have a higher sum and you will get the 4% on a higher sum. So it's beneficial in many ways to public officers.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Isaac, for explaining that concept there. So gratuity, it's not something that is paid in addition to your pension. It's almost like a prepayment of your pension, which you pay back over 12.5 years.
Exactly so.
Good, thank you. Mrs. Wells-Cornwall, government's offer, as the Mrs. Isaac would have explained, is 2% gratuity, while the unions are asking for the 25%. What are the implications of that demand from a financial perspective?
Thank you, Miss Robinson, sorry. When we look at the issue of affordability from two angles, and that's Ministry of Finance. One, the fiscal responsibility law, and two, simple maths, your income minus your expenditure. And we do the income minus the expenditure because we must appreciate that government at any point in time can adjust the fiscal rules, and so without the fiscal parameters, you still have income and expenditure to contend with, and we as individuals, we know what that means. Now, let me just start with the fiscal responsibility law and what it seeks to do. The fiscal responsibility law seeks to anchor government's fiscal policy to ensure that government finances is sustainable over the short, medium and long term. So it's a good piece of legislation to ensure that government is managing its affairs prudently. And the parameters for the rules, there are 8 rules in place. 2 rules are of critical importance for this: the primary expenditure rule and the primary balance rule. The primary expenditure rule basically indicates that your primary expenditure, and your primary expenditure is expenditure minus interest. It's the expenditure that you cannot get away from. Salaries and wages, electricity, and that sort of expenditure. It should not grow more than 2% in any fiscal year when adjusted by inflation. So your growth must be 2%. Yeah. Now that rule is a parameter that we must look at, because with primary expenditure, pension payment is a mandatory payment as long as you commit. So it would feature heavily in the expenditure. Simple income and expenditure, income minus expenses, whether or not we can afford it, is another parameter. When we look at what is being asked or demanded of for the purposes of the unions, and I want to use a year in question, what we project for 2019, and it's live because we're going into the budget and these numbers would be there. We project that we would have a recurrent revenue. Recurrent revenue now is taxes. It's not grant. It is monies that you not even sure that you're going to get, but you're going to collect it from the taxpayers. 780.4 million, right? Our total expenditure, as a typical example, 774.2 million, which leaves 6 million to play with, essentially. And the total expenditure, it includes debt payments, salaries, transfers, and transfers is where pension is embedded, and is that we give to statutory bodies and other parastatals, goods and services, and your local, what you spend on your capital investment on the local side. Now, with a $6 million to play with, and when the numbers were run on the pension, what is being demanded, I want to highlight 2 things. We have 26 2/3 as being the year, the amount of vested period qualifying for pension, and then we have 60 for permanent employees who qualify. 26 2/3 means that somebody who came into the system at age 20, and they are 47, sorry, they can opt for pension. They can leave the system as long as and that's 47. With that, we put in a parameter to determine really how much persons would exit the system at that time. Yeah, and we use 3% in our examples, and it was not across the board. We looked at particular job families like the nurses, police, what it would mean based on historical data. And then you have the mandatory ones that you must deal with, that's age 60. And you're looking at a pension costs, a gratuitous payment, the advance payment of 15.1 million. 15.1 million, and that's in 1 year. And we utilize live data from persons who exist in the system at this time, they spent in the system, how much years they spent in the system, and their age and their salary. So this is raw data that we were working with, live data, to make it as practical as possible. And so when you're running just merely ignoring the fiscal responsibility law for all intents and purposes, yeah, your income, say your salary, minus your monthly commitments as a household, for the purposes of the state, this would cost 15.1. Example that I showed, which just explained, which is a live example, because you would see these numbers in the budget, 6 million you're running on. So how do you now pay that gratuitous payment with 6 million? You can't. So the contention is really that your gratuitous payment be a lower amount, and your monthly payment that government commit to is a higher amount, because it's spread over a period of time, which makes affordability better for the state.
Okay, so it's just absolutely not affordable.
Not
something that is feasible for the government to do. But I think the union's contention, Mrs. Isaac, is that if workers are not paid the 25%, they're basically being sent home in abject poverty. What's your response to that?
We do not agree with that assessment, because government is offering 98% as reduced 2% as gratuity. And as you recall that they may be using two sources of income. What is from the NIS, and government will be topping it up. I just want to make a point, because many people are saying that government just has to put 10%. Government is already paying 50% of that NIS amount of money, because they pay 4%, worker pay 4%. So it's not just the 10 or so much percentage that government will be expected to meet. So instead of a lump sum of 25%, you get a lump sum of 2%, and you have a reduced pension of 98% as opposed to 75%. On any day, I can't see how the worker could be less off. And added to that, you will recover the entire sum, full amount, over a period of 12.5 years. Plan properly for our retirement. I can't see how we could be going home in abject poverty. Government has guaranteed the replacement rate of 70% of your salary. 70% of your salary. Whereas currently, those of us who were in the system, we got 66 and 66.67. Government has agreed to 70%, which is even more. But going home with a higher monthly amount, which is critical.
Okay, so it is clear from what you've explained here, and also the some of the comments you would have made in your statement, that government has really gone above and beyond.
Above and beyond. And government does not have a legal obligation. It is a moral obligation that government is meeting. So
there is also contention too that the government is in breach of the memorandum of understanding that would have been signed between itself and the public sector unions. What is the committee's position on this?
Okay, I welcome the opportunity to speak to that issue, because so much has been said out there about government not honoring the provisions in the memorandum of understanding. I would say categorically that government has been honoring the provisions in the MOU in spirit and in letter. And I would invite workers to ask their leaders to show them a copy of the MOU. Their claim is that we agreed to 25% gratuity. Perhaps it was in the head, but that is not what is on paper. As I explained, using two income streams, the NI and government will be to top up from government. And when we were discussing, well, among ourselves, not with the unions, we considered what the government's portion, we said that would be configured in some way to provide for a gratuity. It was always our thinking it would be configured in some way. So, but there was no formula, there was no agreement whether it would be 10, 15, 100. We were as much as possible to see what are the tenets of the 58th law that could be retained. And in the earlier discussion, we looked at the 25%, but when the calculations were done, and even before we had Ministry of Finance run the figures, we saw that from the pensions perspective, what was coming out government, it would have been manageable, but from the gratuity, it would have strangled the government. And this is not something that we could put for the country. It would not be something that was good for the country. And so we, among ourselves, again began looking at how the formula could be adjusted to be able to provide something.
P.S. Wells Cornwall, I think the point needs to be made here. If we are to accede to these demands, we would reverse a lot of what we're seeing now in terms of our economic growth, in terms of the loan financing, the grant financing that we're able to attract because of the excellent performance that we have managed to have in recent years. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Philomena. This I mean, outside of the international and regional support that we have been getting as a country, we must ensure that we manage our affairs prudently to begin with. So it's not about external more so, but it's about internal first. The IMF in the Article 4 consultation, which is published information, would have indicated that the pension issue, if not managed properly, can throw the fiscal situation off track. It is a risk highlighted by the IMF. It is a risk highlighted by the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank. It is highlighted by the CDB and other partners that it must be managed. The issue and the spread that is being proposed, one would argue that the 25%, as an example, of gratuitous payment, the contention of the time value of money. This is a one-off payment that is not subject to interest. The interest that you would get if you get it today, if we go down that particular road, would only be 2% in the bank. Yeah, if you go to save on that money. Now, the monthly payment that you get on pension, the monthly commitment of the state, that is subject to an increase and an interest, and that interest is when we negotiate for public service increase. Right now, I mean, if we take the last year, this year, and next year, 3, 3, and 4. So it means that the pensioners would get a 4% in 2019. Now, the 98% base on which you get the 4% is higher than a 75% base. And that is critical. The 4% interest, look at it as interest that you get, you cannot get that in the bank. You cannot get it in the bank. So we have to be clear on what it is that you're not losing from that $100. Let's put it very simple. You are getting $2 up front and you're getting $98 over time, and the $98 is subject to interest. Interest by way of negotiation. With the 25%, you get $25 up front, one-off. Whatever you do with it today, that's it. And you get $75 over a period of time spread. And because you have to pay back that $25 in 12 and a half years. That's $25 that you got up front. And I think that needs to be clear. So for us, we must ensure that our fiscal house is in order. But we have a delicate balance with what is expected, because we are public officers and we are crunching these numbers, but we are affected directly. But we cannot be irresponsible with the advice that we give to the state on how they should treat with this issue.
So I think essentially persons, they might, with the percent demand, they get a bigger lump sum up front, but their spending power over time is much lower than if they were to accept the $298. You get less upfront, but over time, on a monthly basis, you have that much more.
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to move on to the point about workers being able to receive 70%, or government making that workers can receive 70% of their last salary as a pension. Mrs. Isaac, can you speak to that subject?
Okay, as part of the negotiations with the union, that was one of the demands that they had, and government was not opposed when we were negotiating the MOU. And the MOU really, it is guiding principles. But what we are now, the position that we are in, is defining the parameters of that pension plan. And that's why we as we said, the devil is in the details. So that's why we would have had this impasse. But as I would have explained, those of us who were in the system, we got 66.667 in terms of the replacement, and they were asking for 70%. Now, mind you, the police and those of the prison service, they have to work 35 years to be eligible to their full. And so it was an advantage to them as well to go down to 26.67. So that's why we were taken aback when we sent the proposal to them, and they came back with a counter proposal that would have cost the government even more and would have reverted to many of the tenets of the 1958 laws, because they have always argued, let us have a negotiated settlement, let us not take it from a legal perspective. So while we were trying to maintain as much of the tenets of the 58 agreement, we have to be mindful that whatever is designed has to be affordable and sustainable. So as the government did agree, make a concession, you go with 70% of your last salary, that is replacement. Of course, under the one of the provisions of the MOU was that all qualifying years would count, whereas for us, after 26 years and 8 months, anything you work after that, you don't get credit for that. So the intention was to give them that. But and so when the actuary did the study, he would have proposed, a graduated increase. Well, when the actual costings were done, a matter of fact, in the MOU, a provision was made that if it is not affordable, that they agree to. So government kept its promise, and when the calculations were done, finance would have told us 70.1, which we put on the table. And so it is much better, much better.
Okay. P.S. Wells Cornwall, would you like to speak to that from your ministry's perspective in terms of crunching the numbers for this particular offer?
Well, there is a pension secretariat, and the pension secretariat, they were charged with the responsibility of getting the raw data in terms of the employee numbers that we have, and we're dealing with established staff, so we have not yet touched the unestablished. And of course, I suspect that at some point the unestablished part of it would have to come into play, but the established staff, so they were responsible for getting that information, collating the salary data, and the parameters, the 25% and all of that. We then took that information and put it in our macroeconomic framework to see whether or not it worked. What we have to do is adjust some of the parameters for inflation, the salary increases, like for instance, the 4%, when we were looking at 2019, we had to adjust salaries for 4% and what it would mean for pension, because pension also would receive that 4%, what our local revenue stream is, and whether or not we can sustain it regardless. We looked at it from sustaining it, all else being constant, meaning that move, they cannot do anything else but pay the pension, and should government invest in this, how is the money diced up at the end of the day? So it was a work in progress. It was intense, and we had to work closely with the secretariat and the actual person that is up there to be able to determine how it fits within our context.
Okay, thank you.
Just let me make one point though. The 70%, the officer must complete 26.66 years service. It start to earn 70%. Anything under the 26.66 years service, it will be on a prorated basis.
Okay. Okay. Let's turn now to the 1958 pension. Which workers within the public service would actually be entitled to that?
Okay. Well, we do have the Constitution, and the Constitution makes provision for that the law to apply is the law in force at the time that you join the public service. Well, there are two parts, because the Constitution talked about the law that would be in place that would apply for persons who, before the Constitution came into effect. The Constitution came into effect on 7th of February 1974, and then after we had the 58 laws, and then we would have had the Pension Disqualification Act that was passed in 1983. Now the Pension Disqualification Act, I believe it was Act number 24 of 83. That law is spent. It is no longer on our law books. So because the provisions of that act has been incorporated into the principal pensions laws. And so those of us who were there before, because the Constitution does not give you a pension. The Constitution protects your rights. The pension is provided for in the pension laws. And so those of us who were there before 83, we would have been eligible under the 58 laws. And so persons who joined on and after 4th April 83, well, they are not eligible for pension, as the pension that they are eligible for is the NIS. That is the NIS pension. However, when we had the Pamela Armstrong case, they challenged that decision, and well, the ruling is now history, and what the courts would have ruled in terms of the PRG government, that it was not constitutional, as it was not legitimized by the elections and so forth, and the courts held that as a unconstitutional government, the laws that it passed were not valid. It was unconstitutional, and so they had to pass the Validation Act, and that was passed, I think, is the 21st of February 1985. So only the workers who were in the system up until the 21st of February 85 would be eligible for the 1958.
Okay. Onto the subject now of the proposals that was put forth by the unions. Has government responded to those?
Actually, yes, we would have. We got it's a counter proposal, because we sent our proposals to them, and we got it on October the 16th. We acknowledged receipt the same day, but we were very perplexed what was in the counter proposal, because it would add rather than lessen the expenditure. And we did send another response again yesterday. So we have, it may be not what they are expecting, but we have responded.
Okay. You said the counter proposal was received in October
the 16th.
Right, but you would have responded in...
We acknowledge receipt and tell them that we will get back to them, we will review and so forth. And but it was very perplexing to us. How do you go back after we would have reached a certain way, agreed on some things? Yes, we did have one or two sticky points, but then you came back and you put the kettle, the fridge, the stove, everything into the proposal. So we were trying to see how do we go forward.
Okay. In addition to it being a bit in terms of the counter proposal that was sent, is there any other factor that played into the government's delayed response to the unions?
We were actually trying to understand what provoked that, and instead of us trying to see how we could find that pathway out. Yes, we had one or two sticky points, and maybe that is what we were hoping, because even as we put the 9% on the 2% on the table, I said to one or two of our friends on the other side, what we need now is some creative thinkers, because the worker is not going to be disadvantaged. But how do we adjust the formula? You know, because we were not in the realm of 2% ourselves, but it is what it is. It is the reality. So we had to accept it. But then how do we adjust? Is that adjust the formula? And my thing is that after 12 and a half years, you would recoup the money, so to speak. Where I thought we should have been thinking is, what happens? I'm entitled to 98% reduced pension for 12 and a half years. What if I die after 1 year? What can I negotiate with the government so that my estate could get something out of that? Something. Because right now it's 1 year. Government afford me 2 years or something. And I thought this is where we needed to go. How can we find a solution? A creative solution. I remember calling P.S. Wells Cornwall too, you know, because I just couldn't understand.
Now, there's evidently a breakdown in negotiations. The unions have stated their demands. The government has offered its position backed by the financial evidence of affordability, and going back to the 2 points that I made very early in the program in terms of pension plans, they must be affordable and sustainable. How do we move past where we are?
We have always enjoyed cordial relations in terms of the negotiations. Staying away from the table will not get us to where we want to be. So we are asking the union to come back around the table, and let us discuss, let us agree, let us disagree. At the end of the day, what we are seeking to find is a pathway, a solution in terms of having a pension for publics. Under the NIS Act, sections 46, I believe 47, government, it provided for government to have had an additional pension, something different for public officers, because it's true that what the NIS provides is not comparable to what we were getting in our time, because we got our NIS and we got our state pension. And so I believe what government is seeking to do is to give effect to that sections 46 and 47. And we asking the unions to come to the table. Let us discuss as we have been accustomed to, and let us find that solution. Staying away is not the answer. And as I said, what we need now are some creative thinkers. What it is that we can do, what it is that we can agree on. So if somebody dies before 12.5 years, what it is that you could ask government to put in place so that the estate can have a little something. We are asking them to come back around the table where we have been accustomed, and let us find that solution.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Isaac. Yes, Wells Cornwell, any final thoughts, comments from you?
Not really. The Ministry of Finance, we have that responsibility to look at the numbers, and we are prepared to do that. We in service to the state, so as soon as the pathway can be determined with all parties, and then we look at it in that context, and we provide the guidance as best as we can.
Thank you very much. I think in closing, I would want to reiterate the words of the chairperson of the government's Pension Engagement Committee, Mrs. Beryl Isaac, in urging the unions to come back around the table so that we can in fact find a solution to this impasse that currently exists. Helps no one in the current situation. We would wish that it be resolved as soon as possible with a meeting of the minds around the table. Thank you again for joining us. This is a special program, or this has been a special program of the Government Information Service. I am Press Secretary Philomena Robertson. I trust that you now have a better understanding of government's position as it relates to negotiations on pension restoration and reform, and a better understanding of all the elements that are involved. Thank you again for joining us.